Hi biologists, let's start by looking at the learning objectives for this lesson. At the end of this section and following the biology syllabus, you should be able to describe the cell cycle and describe the cell's activities in the state of non-division, interphase, and division, mitosis. What does this actually mean? What are we trying to learn? Well, you have to be able to describe the cell cycle or the series of changes that occur in a cell. You have to be able to describe the cell's activities when it is not dividing or in a state of interphase, and when the nucleus is dividing or when it is in a state of mitosis. Let's look at the cell cycle. The cell cycle is the changes that occur in a cell between one cell division and the next. It is looking at the changes that occur when a cell is formed by cell division and until it does cell division itself. It is therefore a sequence or a series of events that result or end up with the formation of new cells. New daughter cells are produced from an original parent cell. Now we have to be very careful of this term daughter. It does not mean female. It is just the science way of saying that new cells are made from an original parent cell. If you like, the cell cycle is basically describing the life cycle of a cell or the life story of a cell. At its simplest level, the cell cycle can be thought of as being divided into two stages. There is a cell non-dividing stage known as interphase, and there is a cell dividing stage known as mitosis. Now, when we look at this in a little bit more detail, we can see that it can be argued that the cell cycle can be divided into three stages. There is a non-dividing stage called interphase, like we've just mentioned, a dividing stage called mitosis, and lastly, a cytoplasmic division stage called cytokinesis. So there you have stage 1, interphase, stage 2, mitosis, and stage 3, cytokinesis. You can even go a step further, which I tend to do myself, especially for those of you who are able for a bit more. I can actually say that the cell cycle is divided into 6 stages, because mitosis is further subdivided into 4 separate stages, known as prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. So in a nutshell, the cell cycle is divided into interphase, prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, and lastly, cytokinesis. But more about that later. For the moment, we will just accept the fact that the cell cycle is divided into 2 main stages. Let's look at each of these stages. Interphase, or the cell non-dividing stage, is the phase or the part of the cell cycle where the cell is not dividing, as we've just said. It is actually the longest phase in the cell cycle. Cells spend most of their life in this stage. Cells spend most of their time not dividing. In this stage, the cell is actively growing and carrying out its everyday activities like making protein. If it's a muscle cell, then it is carrying out movement, for example. When we look at interphase, the first thing we have to realise is that these changes cannot be seen. They are invisible. IN in invisible and IN in interphase. Even though these changes cannot be seen, the cell is actually very active. It is building up a store of energy, usually in the form of a chemical called ATP. It is also building up a store of enzymes. It is duplicating the cell organelles. So, for example, if the cell has 5 mitochondria, it will work and duplicate the number of mitochondria and produce 10 mitochondria. The idea being that if it's going to split in half, then each half will receive 5 mitochondria each and therefore be identical to the parent cell. In the same way, the chromosomes are replicated or photocopied. We use the word replicated when we are talking about copying or duplicating the chromosomes because it indicates that we are making an exact copy of the chromosomes, whereas we use the word duplicated when we want to talk about the cell organelles. Let's look at this DNA replication or chromosome replication in just a little bit more detail for the moment. In DNA or chromosome replication, the single-stranded chromosome is replicated, photocopied exactly, we'll do as a metaphor for the moment, and we produce 2 identical chromosomes or 2 identical strands. These 2 strands are held together by the centromere. Held together, we'll pretend in the middle. M for middle and M in centromere. As a result of DNA replication or chromosome replication, a double-stranded chromosome will be made. Now, of course, this goes on in interphase, as we have just said, but you can't see these changes. You cannot see the chromosomes being replicated because the chromosomes are in the form of chromatin, long, thin threads. IN in chromatin, IN in interphase, and IN in the word invisible. Don't forget, the cell is actually very active, but the changes cannot be seen. They are invisible. Now let's go back to our 2-stage cell cycle again. We have now just discussed interphase, so let's have a quick closer look at mitosis. Now, the definition of mitosis, which has to be learned, is that it is nuclear division. We are talking about the nucleus dividing into 2. Nuclear division in which one nucleus divides to form 2 nuclei, each containing the same number of chromosomes with identical genes. Now, this idea is terribly important, that the 2 new cells that are created ultimately will have the same number of chromosomes as the parent cell, and obviously they will have the identical genes on each of these chromosomes. So if you like, we're going to produce 2 new genetically identical cells with the same number of chromosomes, or in other words, we're going to produce clones of the parent cell, and the new cells will also be clones of each other. Now, when we think about mitosis, when nuclear division is finished and the nucleus has divided or copied itself really, the cell will then divide to form two new cells. The cytoplasm has to divide. These new cells, as we have said already, are genetically identical to each other and to the parent cell. So the two cells are clones. What's interesting is that the cytoplasm and the cell organelles are equally shared between the two cells as well. Now, mitosis only occurs in somatic cells, ordinary, normal body cells. It does not occur in cells associated or responsible for making gametes or sex cells. And there you have it, practice in a jotter. Now that we have reached the end of our lesson, have we achieved our objective? Can you describe the cell cycle? Can you describe the cell activities in the state of non-division, interphase, and division, mitosis?